In this comparative study, I will explore the transnational embodiment of French-inspired cinema and distinguish the similarities and differences between the cinema de look-inspired film Amelie, directed in 2001 by Jean-Pierre Jeunet, and Woody Allen's 2011 film Midnight in Paris. Amelie's plot revolves around the lonely perspective of a local Parisian woman in the working class. After she hears of the tragic death of Princess Diana, Amelie drops a plastic perfume stopper, which dislodges a wall tile and accidentally reveals an old metal box of childhood memorabilia, hidden by a boy who lived in her apartment decades earlier. Amelie resolves to track down the boy and return the box to him. She promises that if it makes him happy, she will devote her life to bringing happiness to others. Amelie secretly executes complex schemes that affect the lives of those around her. Amelie begins projecting her loneliness onto the image. Midnight in Paris is about an American screenwriter, Gil, who vacates to Paris with his fiancée, Inez, and her parents. Gil loves Paris and is even considering moving there. However, Inez doesn't particularly like the city at all. One night, Gil decides to wander the streets of Paris alone. At midnight, an old car with 1920s-looking passengers tells him to get in. He later meets Ernest Hemingway, Scott Fitzgerald, and Josephine Baker. After discussing writing, Hemingway offers to show Gil's novel to Gertrude Stein. As Gil exits the building to fetch his manuscript from his hotel, he finds he is returned to 2011. Confused and intrigued, Gil wants to share with Inez his time travel experience, so he takes her to the alleyway. However, her arrogance and uptight personality doesn't really care, so Gil doesn't project. Over his vacation, he routinely continues to travel back in time. One night out with Hemingway, he meets Pablo Picasso's lover, Adriana, and they are instantly attracted to each other. One day walking around the city, Gil meets Gabrielle, an antique dealer and fellow admirer of the lost generation. Although both films are set in Paris, they each depict the city in their own cultural light. Amelie is set in the year of 1974, while Midnight in Paris portrays Paris in present day, with the exception of traveling back in time. Because Amelie herself is a local, she is consumed by the working-class culture she lives in. Gil, on the other hand, an American tourist, is captivated by the rich, prominent historical and cultural Parisian lifestyle. Because of the character differences and their personal take on the city, Midnight in Paris is a cinematically romanticized film that embellishes in the beauty of the city from Gil's perspective. Although director Woody Allen is known for his international, often European-influenced films, he is, like Gil, not intending to capture the grittier, darker sides of the city. The Acrifice suggests that the scriptwriters of Amelie have a greater understanding of Paris because they are in fact French. By depicting Paris from a local standpoint, the audience is able to understand the diversity of culture in Paris. Perhaps Amelie is so drastically different from Midnight in Paris because it portrays the city aside from its tourism phenomenons. The environment consists of backstreet cafes and bistros occupied by diverse characters to portray the depth of French locals. By establishing a realistic perception of the city, the audience is able to see Paris like any other city, dangerous and imperfect, drawing away from the romantic idea that Paris is the magical city of love and lights. Meanwhile, Amelie is more of a realistic depiction of the characters themselves. However, both films are similar in the sense that they capture a sense of imagination in their protagonists. According to Colviews, Amelie captures the cinema de look genre with a modern take. The coloration is perhaps the factor that defines the film's aesthetic. The shots are filled with low exposure and high contrast filtrations, which highlight greens, reds, yellows, and blues. This vibrance makes the film look more vintage, like a heat wave of nostalgia, which is an important theme in the plot. Similarly, Midnight in Paris is also filmed with an ambience of warm tones. Allen mainly highlights red and orange tones, but he also uses a variety of pastel coloration to emphasize the romantic elements of the film. This technique flatters the weather and often makes the audience want to be there with him, walking in the streets of Paris. Although it is a fantastical film, its fantasy elements are only captured at night, when Gil goes back in time. When he travels back in time, the filtration looks more vintage, like it does throughout Amelie. And in the daytime, Paris looks beautiful, but Allen captures the city in a very modern, realistic style. The lighting contrasts between day and night are drastically different, which leaves the audience wanting more nighttime. Alan implements the use of yellow lighting after midnight. To do this, he uses streetlights and warmer textures. This warm depiction of Paris in the nighttime could easily symbolize Gil's charm for Paris at night. Low-key nighttime lighting also suggests that Gil is experiencing something he doesn't know could be real or not. Jeanette addresses the camera in a very direct way. To bring out his dramatic camera angles, he favors close-up shots and medium shots to really get a closer view on the issues the characters are struggling with. But he also adds in some bird's-eye shots and low angles to depict the variety of perspective the characters face. To emphasize the aura of fantasy in the film, the editor sometimes adds in CGI elements, which give it an animated feeling. The film feels distorted, from its swift camera movements on top of its wide-angle lenses to its sudden transitions. Similarly, Midnight in Paris aims to also bring out a sense of perspective through its camera angles. When Gil is walking, we can see the cinematographer's use of the classic establishing shot. The establishing shots are important because they allow the audience to see Paris in the way Gil does, absolutely mesmerizing. Aside from this, the film transitions and cuts feel really natural and not too dramatic, unlike they do in Amelie. In Conversation, the scenes are shot at eye-level angles with the use of medium shot framing. This is because Alan wants the perspective of the characters to really be brought out in the story's plot, so the audience can follow the emotions and situations the characters are experiencing. Amelie is composed by Jan Tiersen, who aimed to bring out the elements of romance and Frenchness in the roots of the film. When Amelie is riding through the streets of Paris on her bicycle, the music is, and mainly feels, joyful and classical. The use of piano is mainly executed throughout the score and stays in key while exploring the higher and lower octaves of the piano. The score of Midnight in Paris is surprisingly very similar to Amelie's, aside from the piano elements. The score is composed by Steven Rembel and also uses romantic-style sounds. However, because the Jazz Age is such a significant time period when Gil is transitioning, French jazz is really crucial to the film score. When Gil is walking through the streets, there is no dialogue. Transnational cinema is seen in Midnight in Paris when Gil explores the history of Paris by traveling back in time. With the 1920s Jazz Age being a prominent setting for Gil, we can see that there is much more cultural and historical depth to the film. Given that Amelie is already a French film, it could commonly be associated in the transnational category. But it also covers a deeper cultural analysis of Paris, from a local point of view, during a specific time period of cultural shift. We are also presented with numerous themes in the plot that delve into the structure of society and diverse characters with quirky qualities that express these struggles. In addition to the themes that construct the films, they are also raw and comical. Amelie uses sarcasm, ironic elements of French humor, and randomness to add layers to the characters and the construction of the plot. Midnight in Paris explores the awkward cliches of the romantic comedy genre by setting the plot in potentially the most rom-com-oriented city for cinema. However, Alan redefines the genre by adding unexpected elements to the characters. He reverses expectations by adding a historical and cultural depiction of Paris. We've already established that Amelie is a very curious and mischievous character, set out in search of love or the meaning of life. She's a daydreamer, and her curious nature executes itself in her imagination. However, Amelie is also isolated by her childhood and her surroundings, in an extremely protective environment, and survived her way through it with the power to dream. Because of this, Amelie feels a constant sense of isolation. Throughout the film, Amelie strives to make other people happy, and it isn't until the end of the movie when she realizes she needs to make herself happy and find love. Gil is similar to Amelie in Midnight in Paris. He is mysterious, curious, creative, and often naive of how real life plays out. However, Gil doesn't struggle with isolation like Amelie does. In fact, he loves his time alone. But his childlike tendencies drag him down rabbit holes that conflict him to differentiate what is real and what is not. He is only isolated in the sense that he dissociates from reality and its upbringings. His constant optimistic state of mind brings him to a realization that Inez is the wrong person to marry. In the end, he settles with Gabrielle because she appreciates his lust for Paris and fantasy.
Actually, Paris is the most beautiful in the ring.
I feel like that's what I'm always saying. I couldn't agree more with you.
Both movies embody the theme of reality versus fantasy and display influence from the cinema de look movement. Not only are both protagonists dominated by their imaginations, but they both are resistant to the hardships that invest into their real lives. Although they both settle in the end, these characters will never really settle because they're both so absorbed in the fabric of their curious natures and will never stop seeking new discoveries. Amelie's reality is working as a waitress, and Gil's is his unsettling engagement. Throughout both movies, the characters have the power to redefine their lives by pursuing their imaginations and their situations rather than consuming themselves in them. However, they both struggle to separate the two until they realize what it is they really want for themselves.